Welcome, y'all, to this week's edition of Our Fredericksburg. We give you an in-depth look at the people, places, and attractions that make Fredericksburg and Gillespie County a getaway dear to the hearts of Texans and our friends from beyond the Lone Star State. This week in Our Fredericksburg, we take a regional look into the life and legacy of our 36th president, Lyndon B. Johnson, and his wife, Ladybird. President Johnson was born just outside of Stonewall and lived there with his family until they moved to Johnson City when he was a young boy. Later, then Senator Johnson repurchased the ranch in the early 1950s from a family member, and he and Ladybird lived there until his passing in 1973. She continued to live on the ranch part-time until her passing in 2007. They are buried on the ranch in the Johnson Family Cemetery near Stonewall. We will learn a little bit about President Johnson's life and the legacy of both he and his wife, Ladybird, and her contribution to the beautification of America as we visit his boyhood home, the LBJ Ranch, the LBJ Library, and the Ladybird Johnson Wildflower Research Center.
Welcome to the Lyndon B. Johnson National Historical Park and to the boyhood home of President Lyndon Baines Johnson in Johnson City. This is his parents' home, the house that they moved to in 1913 when he was 5 years old, moving in here from Stonewall into town. And if you really want to understand President Johnson and his life, you need to look back at his parents and their time and growing up in Johnson City circa that era. This is where he spent about age 5 to 18 when he went away finally to the Teachers College in San Marcos. We're going to take a walk through the house with you, talk about his parents, their times, and what it was like growing up for him. The president's childhood was really strongly influenced in two areas. One is politics and one is going to be education, both of which his parents have ties to. His father, Sam Ely Johnson Jr., was a member of the Texas House of Representatives for 6 terms. And when you look at Lyndon Johnson's childhood, you've got his father in the state legislature, his grandfather Baines, his mother's father, his uncle Clarence Martin that owned the ranch at Stonewall, and his cousin Tom Martin, who grew up out at Stonewall. All these people were members of the Texas House of Representatives. So in this household, you knew what they liked to talk about. In the parlor, you've got the president's father and mother, Sam Ely Johnson Jr. and Rebecca Baines Johnson, both of whom had a better than average education. The president's father was one of 9 children, grew up on the farm at Stonewall. Lyndon Johnson's mother, Rebecca Baines Johnson, was one of 3 children who grew up in the little communities of Blanco and later Fredericksburg. Her father, Joseph Wilson Baines, was able to send them to school and not only educated his son but his daughter. She went to what was then called Baylor Female College. This is the room Lyndon Johnson shared with his younger brother Sam Houston Johnson. The 2 boys had the west room of the house. Their sisters, the 3 girls in the family, Rebecca, Josepha, and Lucia, shared the front bedroom. Baseball was the big game in those days, and you see the evidence of that in here. If you really want to understand the life of President Lyndon Johnson and the Hill Country, we invite you to spend some time with us here at the park and at the State Historical Park at Stonewall, and come back and see us again.
We move down the road from Johnson City to the LBJ Ranch in Stonewall to gather further perspective on Lyndon Baines Johnson and Ladybird Johnson's lives.
We're standing here this morning in front of the Texas White House, the ancestral home of the 36th President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson. The name Texas White House was applied to this main ranch house on the LBJ Ranch by the news media, not because the president lived here, but because technology allowed President Johnson, for the first time in U.S. history, to create a fully functioning remote White House operation away from Washington, D.C. And in fact, in the 1960s, this site was the site of a lot of activity because LBJ's version of a vacation was to be home here near his ancestors, but to keep doing what he loved to do, which was the work of the country as president and politics. Also, because of the great amount of legislation that a seasoned politician like LBJ passed as president, he passed over 1,000 new federal laws in a little over 5 years as president. Many of those decisions took place right here at the Texas White House in Central Texas. Sometimes meeting in the yard or in the president's office in the house, or sometimes in the living room or the dining room. LBJ was always going, and you never knew when an impromptu meeting might be called.
From LBJ's boyhood home, showing us his humble beginnings, to the legacy of the LBJ Library and Museum in Austin.
Hi, I'm Sandy Cohen. I'm the curator of the LBJ Library and Museum. I want to welcome everybody. The LBJ Library and Museum officially opened on May 22nd, 1971. We are one of 13 presidential libraries. And here at the Johnson Library, or at least the LBJ Museum, we not only document the history of LBJ's presidency, but we also have a permanent exhibit on the 1960s, the era of the 1960s. And we also showcase at least once a year temporary exhibits ordinarily detailing one particular aspect of the 1960s. We're very heavily visited, thankfully. We're free and open to the general public. And right now we're standing in the Great Hall of the library, which is probably the most iconic part architecturally of the LBJ Library. And you see behind me boxes of the papers of the Johnson presidency, which number upwards of 45 million, which is open to the general public. Okay, this is our brand new temporary exhibit, which opened in early April of this year. It's called Left to Right, Radical Movements of the 1960s. And it'll be up through New Year's Day 2012. The exhibit's called Left to Right, Radical Movements of the 1960s because it deals with both the radical left-wing and right-wing political movements of the 1960s. For example, a radical left-wing political movement were the Students for a Democratic Society, probably the most well-known. The most well-known radical right-wing movement would have probably been the John Birch Society, which we also have a display on in this exhibit. And it also deals with the many social movements of the 1960s. This is, I think, maybe the centerpiece of our permanent exhibit. It's the desk in which President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which most historians consider to be the pivotal act of the civil rights movement, the act which really provided or was on the road to providing equal rights for African Americans, because it gave them the right to vote without any restrictions, unfair restrictions, such as poll taxes and other unfair means of discrimination which had existed throughout the South prior to the passage of the Voting Rights Act. We're now on the 10th floor of the LBJ Library, and the main exhibit on the 10th floor is actually one on the life and career of Ladybird Johnson. But here is the Oval Office, just exactly as it existed during the presidency of Lyndon Johnson. It is 7/8 the size of the real Oval Office. And everything in here, with just a couple of exceptions, is authentic, and it looks exactly as it did when LBJ was president.
Now we move from LBJ's presidential legacy to Ladybird Johnson's lasting legacy of the Ladybird Johnson Wildflower Center.
Hi, I'm Susan Reeve, and I'm the director here at the Ladybird Johnson Wildflower Center just outside Austin, Texas. This morning, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what you can see if you visit the Wildflower Center. We have been on this location about almost 17 years. The Wildflower Center will celebrate its 30th birthday next year, and I think as we walk around the gardens this morning, you'll see how we have evolved in those 30 years and find things that will make you want to come visit. The mission of the Wildflower Center has always been to protect and preserve the native wildflowers of Texas, but it is much broader than that. And the gardens that you'll see today are not just gardens to be enjoyed for their beauty, but to be appreciated for what native plants give back to our landscapes in terms of wildlife habitat, in terms of water purity. We have evolved from just thinking about the wildflowers to realizing all that these native plants do for us. This is one of my favorite parts of the gardens here at the Wildflower Center. Behind me is our butterfly pond, and up the hill where you cannot see it is an insectary where we actually propagate butterflies. And there are plants in the gardens that we raise specifically because they're so attractive to butterflies. And by putting those in your garden, you can watch wonderful butterflies a good part of the year. Behind me, though, is a pond, and this is a favorite spot for any kids that come here because you can see turtles in here, you will see little fish in here, sometimes frogs, and occasionally a little snake, which is always very exciting. From this place, you can see our tower, and this is really the iconic feature here at the Wildflower Center. You can climb to the top of it and have a wonderful, spectacular view of all the gardens and some of the surrounding areas. We now have 279 acres here, and in addition to the gardens, visitors can go out on our trails and see more of these plants in their natural settings. And so, as much as we talk about native plants helping define a sense of place, a sense of cultural identity, so too does the architecture here at the Wildflower Center.
We've been looking at the life and legacy of LBJ and Ladybird, from his boyhood home in Johnson City to the LBJ Ranch in Stonewall, to the LBJ Library and Museum in Austin, and the Ladybird Johnson Wildflower Center in Austin. Great regional ideas for your next visit to Fredericksburg. And that's a wrap on this week's edition of Our Fredericksburg. Before we say auf Wiedersehen, I'd like to remind you that for a relatively small area, we probably have more fun things to see and do than you have vacation. Immerse yourself in history at our museums and trek about our parks. Tour vineyards and wineries. Discover treasures from our thriving arts community, plus great shopping throughout town. Sample our many restaurants and bakeries. Dance to live music or catch a concert or event. So come visit us soon and lose yourself in the magic of Fredericksburg, the Texas Hill Country, featuring great times, German heritage, and plenty of Texan hospitality.